Good morning. This is a presentation of Luís Gonzaga and Pedro Sequeira, and the title is Portuguese Handball during Covid-19 Pandemic, Impact on Dropout Rates Among Players in Portugal. As you know, because it was the same in the different countries in Europe, the Covid-19 pandemic had and still has a huge impact all around the world. Unfortunately, the sports ecosystem was one of the fields more affected. In all events, meetings and competitions, elite and grassroots sports were closed, and players prevented from playing their favorite sports. Of course, Portugal and the Portuguese handball were not let out of these constraints and stops. Again, 6 months later, Portugal had another lockdown, as it happened in more countries around Europe. And only after the second lockout, it was possible for the house handball players to play handball with no restrictions. And because of this, the objective of this study is to analyze the dropout of handball players during the COVID pandemic. As methods, we use the database of the registered players of the Portuguese Handball Federation for a descriptive and interpretative analysis. To measure the dropout of handball players, we compare the records of 3 different seasons. The first season, 2018-2019, as you know, because it was the same in your countries, was the season before the pandemic. The next season, 2019-2020, there was already the pandemic in the second half of the season, and with this big lockdown. And finally, the last season, 2020-2021, where there was also a second lockdown and many restrictions. We considered age groups, gender, and geographic regions for our study. Concerning the first table, concerning handball players registered in Portuguese Handball Federation before and during the pandemic. As you can see, when comparing our regular handball from the season before the pandemic and the season during the pandemic, we almost lost 30%, 31.32% of our players. So this means that 1/3 of the players were lost during the pandemic. Concerning wheelchair handball, we didn't have this problem because we are speaking about little groups. It doesn't affect it, and there is a second reason. In the first 2 seasons, we only had 8 teams. In the third season, we had 11 teams, so more players were registered. Concerning beach handball, yes, here we had a big problem because, as you remember, during the beginning of the pandemic, it was at the beginning of summer. And in this summer of 2019-2020, it was not possible to play any sport at the beaches or outside the beaches in the sand fields. So there were really no competitions. The only 56 inscriptions, maybe they were before the regular beach handball season. And as you can see, 2020-2021, we again had the competitions in beach handball, and even here we had 40% of dropout. Of course, it will be very interesting to compare these data with this season, 2021-2022, to try to understand if we cannot say after the pandemic, but now it's pretty similar with 2018-2019 to understand how the numbers are. If we compare in Portugal, you know, it's a small country, but more or less 600 kilometers long and 300 kilometers between Ocean Atlantic and Spain. So it's not a big country like Poland or Germany or or France or Russia, but we could also organize. And as you can see, looking for these three regions, the results are very similar. Only in the islands there were some differences, and there is a reason for that, because the Açores and Madeira, they are autonomous regions, and pandemic at the beginning in Açores and Madeira was not so bad, so they could have more time open sport and other things, and because of this maybe the results are better. And as you can see in Açores, the dropout was very, very small when compared with other regions and with Portugal continental. If we compare males and females, the difference are very similar, and as we can see, there is a big loss. And again, maybe because we have more male players, maybe because of this, the loss was a little higher, 7% more. But if you remember, in table 1, we are always speaking about 30% of all players were lost. Finally, if we look for the age groups, and here is the main problem of COVID. And if you look for the smaller ones, between 4 and 10-year-olds, it's here in Portugal we call Bambis, Manitas, and Minis. As you can see, more than 50% of the players were lost. We are almost speaking about 78% from the smaller ones. So here, these are really bad results. When we go to the other age groups, of course, between under 12, under 13, under 14, under 15, it's really not so good. It only starts to be good when you go to the higher, and there is an explanation for that, because during the pandemic, it was sooner for the players who are, in Portugal we call seniors or adults, between 18 and 35, and at that age group it was possible to have practice and to have competitions. So what many teams made was putting the players under 16, under 17, under 18 and under 19 playing in these teams, so they could have continued to have practice. Of course, with the masters, we also had a big dropout, because again, it was an age group that was dangerous because of their age, and there was also big restrictions like with the young ones. So, of course, from this study, we can have some ideas why we are having these dropouts. Of course, it's not easy to find this. The findings suggest that the entire sport ecosystem, that there is a crisis, and so this means that handball was affected because of this. And we believe that in the future we need to make more detailed studies, and as I said before, comparing these 2 seasons where the pandemic was really bad with a lot of lockdowns, and this new season, if everything goes more or less better like it was in the past. So there are some questions that we leave here for you, like what should we do to invite players back but with added safety precautions, how to manage the risk to your players, gaming and esports have a significant rate of going through the pandemic, what can we retain from this information, and so on. So there are quite a few questions that we should make, and the reflection that we should make, so that we could recover handball as it was before the pandemic. And this is, as you understand, a big issue in Portugal, and we believe in all Europe. Thank you for your attention, and if you have questions, then we will have possibility to discuss.